The sun hung low, staining the sky with gold. The air was still, heavy with heat and the faint scent of dry grass. It was the quiet hour before dusk when the first sound came, a low rumble, too deep for thunder and too alive to ignore. Rahim, the caretaker, stopped by the pen with a half-filled bucket in hand. He turned toward the horizon, listening. The sound came again, steady and powerful, rolling across the plains like a heartbeat carried on the wind. Near the fence sat Muna, the old tabby cat who had once astonished everyone. 2 years earlier, she had wandered into this sanctuary and found 3 abandoned lion cubs, weak and mewling in a crate. No one had expected her to approach. Yet, she had climbed inside, curled around them, and offered warmth where death had already begun to settle. They grew under her care, the orphans and the stray, a strange family bound by instinct, not blood. When the cubs grew strong and wild, they were taken to the reserve beyond the hills. 4 days afterward, Muna searched every corner, calling softly into the empty air. When the answers never came, she returned to her place by the fence, waiting each sunset as though memory itself might walk back through the gate. Now, 2 years later, the air changed again. Muna's tail flicked, ears twitching. She rose and stared into the tall grass beyond the boundary. Rahim followed her gaze, and there, emerging from the sea of gold, came 3 lions. Their bodies glowed in the last light, muscles rippling with each deliberate step. They were grown now, wild and regal, but something in their movement felt familiar. Rahim's breath caught when he saw the smallest male, a faint scar beneath his left eye. "Muna," he whispered, almost to himself. The cat stood motionless, her pupils wide, tail trembling in the dust. The lion stopped at the edge of the fence. The scarred male moved forward, head lowered, eyes locked on the tiny figure before him. For a long moment, nothing moved. The silence was complete, except for the steady beat of wings from a distant crow. Then Muna took a step closer. She pressed her nose to the wire, her body quivering but unafraid. The lion inhaled deeply, a slow, thoughtful breath. His chest rose and fell. Then came a low, vibrating sound, not a roar, not a growl, but something softer, almost like a sigh. Rahim felt a shiver crawl up his spine. He had seen lions hunt, fight, and protect, but never this, a moment held together by memory alone. "She's here," he murmured under his breath. "They remember." The lion stayed there for several heartbeats, eyes fixed on the cat. The air between them shimmered in the heat, a fragile thread connecting 2 worlds that should never have met. Then, as gently as he had come, the lion stepped back. He turned toward the open plain, paused once more, and looked back at Muna. She remained still, tail curved around her paws, eyes following him. A soft mewl escaped her, brief, almost silent, yet filled with something that crossed the boundary of species. The lion blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared into the tall grass. The other 2 followed, their bodies vanishing into the fading light. The sound of their paws faded until only the wind remained. Muna sat watching the horizon, her fur rippling gently. When the last trace of gold left the sky, she settled down by the fence, curling into a small circle of quiet warmth. Rahim didn't move. He stood there in the dim light, his hands still, his heart full of something wordless, a mix of awe and gratitude. Somewhere far beyond the trees, a lion called, a long, echoing note that rose and faded into the dusk. Muna's ears twitched. She closed her eyes, and a faint purr vibrated through the evening air. Love, it seemed, could outlive even the wild. Morning came softly, carried on the scent of dust and wildflowers. The sanctuary was still, except for the distant bleating of antelope and the creak of wooden gates swaying in the wind. Rahim walked his usual route with the slow patience of habit, his boots brushing against dry grass. When he reached the far fence, he saw Muna sitting in her usual place. But something was different. She wasn't facing the horizon anymore. Instead, she sat with her back to it, watching the yard, her tail curled neatly around her paws. For 2 years, she had stared outward, eyes fixed on the plains. But now, it seemed, she was finally looking homeward. Rahim crouched beside her. "They were here, weren't they?" he murmured. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Muna blinked slowly. Her ears flicked toward the sound of his voice, then back again toward the trees. There was no fear in her, just a stillness that felt both proud and tired. The fence still held traces of what had happened, faint paw prints pressed into the soil, a line of broken grass where the lions had stood. Rahim brushed his fingers across the marks, half expecting to feel the weight of memory lingering there. 4 days after that visit, Muna changed. She still ate, still curled in her favorite shaded spot by the olive tree, but her energy had softened. The restless pacing stopped. Her eyes no longer searched the horizon when dusk came. The other cats in the sanctuary, strays that came for food and never left, sometimes approached her now, circling curiously. Before, she would have hissed or turned away, unwilling to share her place. But now, she allowed them near. One evening, Rahim found a small kitten pressed against her side, nursing quietly while she lay half asleep. He smiled at the sight. "Back to mothering, eh?" he whispered, though she didn't stir. The days grew cooler. The dry winds shifted, bringing with them the faint promise of rain. The savannah turned from yellow to pale green, and clouds began to drift across the wide sky. Muna's movement slowed. She slept longer, sometimes staying curled by the fence even as the sun climbed high. Rahim began bringing her food and water there, setting the bowl beside her gently so as not to disturb her rest. He never spoke much, words felt too heavy here. Instead, he would sit nearby for a while, listening to the wind and the soft calls of birds nesting in the acacia trees. The sanctuary had seen births, rescues, and loss, but this silence felt different, sacred somehow. One late afternoon, the sky darkened with the scent of rain. Thunder rolled far in the distance. Muna stirred from her sleep, lifted her head, and looked once toward the fence. Her fur rippled lightly in the wind. She let out a small, breathy sound, half meow, half sigh. Rahim watched her for a long moment. The air seemed to hold its breath again, just as it had that day when the lions returned. Somewhere deep within the savannah, he thought he heard a faint, distant roar, carried faintly by the storm's edge. Muna's ears twitched once, as if she had heard it too. Her eyes softened, and then she settled back down, curling her body tight against the earth. The first drops of rain began to fall, darkening the dust around her. Rahim stayed beside her as the rain thickened. He didn't speak or move, only placed his hand gently on the ground near her. The thunder rolled again, slow and far away. When the storm finally passed, the air smelled of new earth and clean beginnings. Muna slept peacefully beneath the olive tree, her fur damp but shining in the last light of evening. The world around her seemed newly washed, quiet, calm, complete. That night, the sanctuary was still. Somewhere beyond the plains, lions called again, not in mourning, but in song. And though Rahim could not be sure, he thought he saw Muna's tail flick gently in her sleep, as if answering back. The rains passed, leaving the sanctuary soft and green. The air smelled of wet earth and new grass, and puddles glimmered in the sun. Rahim walked his usual path, boots sinking lightly into the damp soil. When he reached the olive tree, he stopped. The place where Muna had always rested was empty. Her bowl lay half buried in the mud, and the ground was smooth, as if she'd never been there at all. It had been 3 days since she disappeared. No paw prints, no sound, not even a trace of fur. He had searched every corner of the sanctuary, the sheds, the tall grass, the fence line, but deep down, he knew. Cats like her didn't vanish. They simply knew when to leave. Rahim crouched near the roots and touched the soil. "You did enough," he murmured softly. Then, from beneath the tree, came a faint mewl, high, trembling, alive. He froze. Slowly, he pulled back a cluster of leaves. There, in a small hollow, lay 3 tiny kittens. Their fur was damp and curled, their eyes sealed shut. One had a faint streak above its eye, catching the morning light. Rahim's breath caught. "So that's why you left," he whispered. There was no sign of Muna, but her scent lingered, warm and familiar. The kittens stirred, pressing against one another for warmth that wasn't there anymore. Gently, he fetched a towel and laid it beside them, though he didn't touch them yet. Sometimes, mothers came back. Sometimes, they didn't. The day passed slowly. The sky shifted from blue to amber, clouds glowing above the grasslands. In the distance, a lion's call rolled across the plain, deep, steady, carrying through the still air. Rahim looked toward the sound and smiled faintly. "You'd like that, wouldn't you, old girl?" He built a small wooden crate near the tree and lined it with cloth. Each morning, he came with a dropper of milk, feeding the kittens one by one. They grew stronger, their cries louder. The smallest often sat near the fence, staring at the horizon, as if waiting for something unseen. Some evenings, Rahim thought he saw her, a flicker of striped fur, a shape slipping through the grass, but when he turned, there was nothing. Still, the feeling lingered, not absence, but presence stretched thin across memory. Weeks passed. The kittens learned to climb, stumble, and chase each other through the grass. They filled the sanctuary with small, bright life again. Rahim noticed that each of them carried a piece of her, a tilt of the head, a way of watching the wind, a calm that never seemed to break. One golden afternoon, he leaned on the fence and watched them play. The smallest crouched low, tail twitching, pretending to stalk shadows, bold and quiet, like a tiny lion. Rahim smiled. "Just like her," he said under his breath. As the sun dipped below the plains, a lion's distant roar echoed again, faint but familiar. The kitten looked up, ears perked, then returned to its game. Rahim felt peace settle in his chest. Muna was gone, but her story hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. When twilight came, he gathered the kittens gently into his arms. They purred softly, warm and safe against him. He looked once toward the empty horizon and whispered, "They'll remember you." The wind moved through the grass like a slow wave. Above him, the first star appeared, quiet, steady, and kind. The dry season returned slowly, drawing the green from the plains. The air shimmered with heat, and dust hung over the sanctuary like faint smoke. Yet inside the fence, life moved softly, steadily. Rahim leaned on the wooden gate, watching the kittens, now nearly grown, prowl through the sunlit yard. They were taller, leaner, their coats gleaming bronze in the light. The smallest, the one with the faint streak above its eye, had become the boldest. She often climbed the fence posts, balancing at the top with her gaze turned toward the horizon, just as Muna once did. He called her Rani, though the name came to him quietly one morning without thought. "Queen," he'd said aloud, and she had blinked at him as if she understood. The sanctuary had grown quieter since Muna's disappearance, but not emptier. Her spirit lingered, in the kittens' calmness, their grace, and the way they seemed to sense the wild beyond the boundary. One evening, the air shifted. The wind carried something familiar, a deep, rolling vibration that stirred the dry grass. Rahim froze mid-step, his heart quickening. It was a sound he hadn't heard since that golden day 2 seasons ago. He walked toward the fence, eyes scanning the plains. Dusk was falling, painting everything in soft orange and shadow. And then he saw them, 3 lions, moving slowly through the tall grass, their silhouettes blurred by the heat. The same trio. Older now, broader in chest, their movements slower, more deliberate. The smallest male still bore the faint scar beneath his left eye. Rahim didn't speak. He only stood still, the memory of Muna flickering behind his eyes. Rani had already noticed them. She stood near the fence, tail lifted, body alert but calm. The other kittens hid behind the troughs, but she remained, eyes fixed on the approaching shapes. The lion stopped several yards away. The scarred male stepped forward, his gaze settling on the fence line. He lowered his head, nostrils flaring, breathing in the air, the scents, the faint echoes of what once was. Rani let out a quiet chirp, a sound soft and uncertain, but it carried across the silence. The lion responded with a low rumble, deep and resonant, not a roar but a memory in sound. Rahim felt his throat tighten. It was the same place, the same stillness, the same invisible thread connecting wild hearts across years. The lion took one more step closer. Rani didn't move. Her ears flicked, her body poised, tail swaying gently. Between them stood nothing but a wire fence, fragile, thin, and powerless against the weight of history. For a moment, Rahim could almost see Muna there, the small striped figure that had once bridged this impossible distance between predator and companion. And now, her legacy lived on in silence, unspoken but understood. The lion gave a soft exhale, a deep hum of recognition, then turned back toward the plains. The others followed. Their golden forms vanished into the rising dusk, swallowed by the wide, wild land beyond. Rani stayed by the fence long after they were gone. She sat down slowly, curling her tail around her paws, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The fading sun turned her fur to copper. Rahim approached quietly and stood beside her. "They came back," he whispered. "Just like before." Rani blinked, and the last light of day caught her eyes, 2 tiny embers glowing in the twilight. As darkness fell, the night filled with familiar sounds, insects, distant thunder, and somewhere, faint but clear, a lion's low call drifting through the wind. Rani's ears twitched toward the sound. She didn't move, didn't flinch, only listened, still and proud, as though she understood it was meant for her. Rahim smiled softly. "You hear them, don't you?" The stars appeared, one by one, scattered across the darkening sky. The sanctuary breathed quietly beneath them, alive, connected, and at peace. The years passed quietly, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the steady hum of life. The sanctuary had grown, new fences, new shelters, a small orchard where the olive tree still stood. Time had softened everything, even the wild edges of the land. Rahim's hair had turned silver, his step slower, but his routine never changed. Each morning, he walked the path past the old tree. The wood of its trunk had deepened, roots spreading wider, as if holding all that had happened here. Rani and her siblings still roamed the sanctuary, sleek and watchful. They were fully grown now, independent but loyal, often resting near the same fence where Muna had once waited. Rahim sometimes thought of them as quiet sentinels, guarding both memory and boundary. One dawn, a heavy mist blanketed the land. The sun broke through slowly, gold spilling across the horizon. Rahim walked with his usual steadiness, listening to the morning sounds, insects humming, birds chattering, the soft crunch of soil beneath his boots. Then he noticed Rani was missing. He checked the feeding trough, the shade by the trees, the old shed. Nothing. A faint unease crept into his chest, a familiar pull, the same one he'd felt years ago when Muna had first disappeared. He followed the fence line until it curved toward the far side of the sanctuary, where the land met open grass. There, through the mist, he saw her, perched on the top of a fallen post, her body poised and still, tail flicking lightly. Beyond her stretched the plains, wide, silent, and endless. And far away, almost hidden by the haze, movement stirred. 3 lions stood near the ridge, their shapes rising like ghosts out of light. Rahim stopped where he was. He didn't call out. The scene felt fragile, as if a single sound might shatter it. Rani's head lifted. She didn't hiss or run, she simply watched. One of the lions, a female this time, tall and broad, raised her head in return. The air between them shimmered faintly, filled with something that felt older than either of them. No sound, no movement. Only that invisible recognition. For a moment, Rahim thought of Muna, the small stray who had crossed an impossible line between the tame and the wild, the one who had given everything without understanding why. And now, her bloodline stood here, meeting her legacy under the same sky. The lions lingered a while longer, then turned back toward the open plains. The wind shifted, carrying their scent across the fence before fading into the heat. Rani watched them until they disappeared, her gaze steady and calm. Rahim approached slowly. "You saw them, didn't you?" he whispered. Rani turned her head toward him and blinked, slow and deliberate. Then, without sound or hesitation, she leapt down from the post and brushed past his leg, light, sure, unafraid. She walked back toward the sanctuary's heart, her tail high, her steps easy. Rahim watched her go, his chest warm with quiet understanding. Some bonds, he realized, never broke. They only changed shape, finding new voices across generations. As the sun climbed higher, the mist lifted, revealing the full stretch of golden land. The fence cast long, thin shadows that reached toward the wild beyond. Rahim looked out one last time and smiled. "Go on," he said softly. "That's where you came from." The wind stirred, carrying a faint sound, distant roars echoing through the open air, blending with the morning calls of birds. It was a greeting, not a farewell. And as the light spread across the plains, the line between wild and home disappeared, leaving only the quiet truth of where it all began.